A manager saw a quiet black man walk into her store and told him to leave. What she didn't know was that he owned the entire company, and her career was about to end in the break room. Dorian Maxwell didn't care much for titles. CEO, owner, boss. None of it really mattered to him anymore. Not after what it took to get here. 49 years old, 2 decades in business, and enough scars to prove it. What mattered now was people. How they acted when no one was watching. How they treated others when they thought they had the upper hand. That's why, on a humid Friday morning in mid-August, Dorian pulled into the parking lot of one of his newest store acquisitions. Wendell and Birch, a home goods chain tucked inside a quiet strip mall just outside Roswell, Georgia. The kind of place where folks came for curtain rods, throw pillows, maybe a spice rack or two. He parked in a faded corner spot, left the Mercedes at home, and stepped out wearing jeans, scuffed Timberlands, and a plain grey t-shirt. No watch. No assistant. Just him and the slow hum of early morning traffic. The store had been part of a local family-run franchise for years before Dorian bought it, along with 6 others earlier that summer. The deal went through fast. The brand needed new leadership. Dorian saw potential, but buying the business on paper was one thing. Knowing what really went on inside the walls, that took time. That took walking in without an announcement, no heads-up call to the manager, no CEO is coming memo, just walking in like anyone else. He took a breath and pulled open the glass door. The little bell above it jingled. Inside, the air smelled like lavender sachets and lemon floor cleaner. Neutral music played from a corner speaker. The shelves were tidy, lined with picture frames and hand towels. Dorian paused near a display of accent rugs, watching how the lone cashier chatted with a middle-aged couple near the counter. That's when he saw her. A white woman in her early 50s, short red blonde bob, a crisp navy blouse tucked neatly into black slacks. She was heading his way with a clipboard and the air of someone who had somewhere better to be. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, looking him over quickly, then looking away just as fast. "No, just browsing," Dorian said casually. She didn't budge. "Well, if you're not buying anything, I'll need you to move away from the entrance." He blinked. "Excuse me?" The woman straightened. "I said, if you're not here to shop, you can't stand around." Store policy. Dorian kept his tone light. Didn't know looking at rugs counted as loitering. "Sir," she said sharply, glancing around as if embarrassed to be having this conversation in front of anyone. "I've had problems in this location before. I can't have people hanging around without purpose." He studied her calmly. "Do you treat everyone who walks in like this?" "I'm just doing my job," she snapped, growing more defensive with each word. "We've got to keep a professional environment here, and I don't appreciate you, Carolyn," a voice called softly from behind the counter. Both turned. A young woman with short braids, maybe early 20s, stood at the register. Her name tag read Mika Powell. Carolyn sighed. "What, Mika?" Mika didn't answer right away. She just stared at Dorian, then back at Carolyn, then back again. That name, that face. She'd seen both in the onboarding packet. Dorian gave her a small nod. Mika's eyes widened just slightly. She said nothing. Carolyn turned back to Dorian, clearly annoyed now. "Look, I don't want any problems, but I'm gonna have to ask you." He cut her off gently. "You're the manager here?" "I am," she said firmly. "Carolyn Ridge." Dorian reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small, folded company document, the kind only upper-level executives were issued. He held it out without a word. Carolyn took it, unfolded it, read the first line. Her mouth twitched, eyes narrowed, then she read it again. "Dorian Maxwell," she muttered. "CEO." He nodded once, her face drained. But the room hadn't caught up yet, and the real consequences hadn't even begun. Carolyn Ridge stood frozen, the paper in her hand like it had caught fire. Her fingers curled the edge unconsciously, as if she could crumple the truth out of it. Her eyes flicked up to Dorian, then back down to the words in front of her. He was still standing there, same jeans, same plain t-shirt, same quiet stare. "Did I ask this real?" she asked, her voice lower now, the sharpness gone. "Yes, he said, polite but distant. "I own this store along with 6 others." Carolyn blinked rapidly. I didn't know. "No one told me you were coming." Dorian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That was kind of the point. Behind her, Mika was motionless. Another employee, tall, light-skinned in his 30s, had stepped out of the stockroom and was watching now, too. The energy in the store had shifted, even if no one said a word. It wasn't about fear, it was about realization that something was wrong, and it was already too late to fix it with a fake smile. Carolyn snapped into gear. I didn't mean to offend you, Mr. Maxwell, I truly didn't recognize you. And with everything that's been going on lately, people walking in, stealing. You thought I was one of them? Dorian asked, still calm. Carolyn pressed her lips together. We've had incidents, I was just being cautious. He tilted his head. Is that what you call it? Carolyn's jaw shifted slightly, I wasn't profiling, if that's what you're suggesting. I didn't say you were. He paused, but you said it for me. A long silence fell between them. Carolyn seemed to catch her breath. Look, I'm sure you understand how stressful retail can be. We get all types in here. I was trying to protect the store's interests, I am the store's interests, Dorian said quietly. There was no anger in his voice. That made it worse, he folded the document and slid it back into his pocket. Then, stepping away from the rug display, he walked slowly toward the back of the store. No fanfare. No drama. Carolyn didn't follow right away. But after a few seconds of standing there like someone had pulled the floor out from under her, she turned sharply and headed behind the counter. Mika, she hissed. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Mika looked down. I wasn't sure if I should. I didn't want to embarrass you. Embarrass me? Carolyn scoffed, grabbing the phone from its cradle. This is already a nightmare. I've got to call regional. Get ahead of this before. You might want to put that down, came Dorian's voice from behind her. She turned. He was leaning casually against the frame of the doorway to the employee corridor. I already called them, he said. Carolyn's mouth opened, then closed. You already called? I did. Before I walked in, actually, Dorian said. Wanted to see if the folks on the floor matched what I'd been hearing from HR. What have you been hearing? She asked, though she already seemed to know the answer. That morale's low. Turnover's high. That some employees feel uncomfortable speaking up. He looked at Mika. I think I just saw why. Carolyn's face darkened. Mr. Maxwell, with all due respect, I've run this location for 6 years. I've kept losses down, hit sales targets, and held this team together through staff shortages and supply chain issues. I don't think one misunderstanding. This isn't about sales, Dorian interrupted gently. It's about how people are treated. Customers, employees, anyone who walks through that door. She straightened her spine. I treat everyone fairly? No, you treat everyone equally. You assumed that meant fair. He let the words sink in. They're not always the same thing. Behind her, the tall man from the stockroom looked away. Mika's eyes were glassy, lips tight. No one wanted to breathe too loud. Carolyn folded her arms across her chest. So what now? Dorian glanced at the wall clock. Regional's sending someone. Should be here in the next hour. To evaluate me? To evaluate the store, he said. Then, after a pause. But yes, you're part of that. Carolyn huffed and turned away, biting her tongue. It was the first time she didn't have the last word. But the silence from her staff said more than she ever could. Carolyn didn't leave the front of the store. She stood stiffly near the counter, pretending to busy herself with receipts and clipboard notes. But her hands kept pausing, hovering, shaking slightly. Every so often, she'd glance toward the back hallway where Dorian had disappeared. In the meantime, the rest of the store was unusually quiet. Customers continued to trickle in, unaware of the tension brewing between displays of scented candles and ceramic dishes. But employees felt it thick in the air. Mika stood near the register, eyes darting between her screen and the others. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe even apologize, but couldn't find the right moment. The man from the stockroom, Nolan Frey, leaned against a support column near aisle Ford. He'd worked at Wendell and Birch for 3 years. Quiet, steady, dependable. He wasn't one for gossip, but this? This was the kind of thing that made you question who you'd been working under all this time. Carolyn suddenly stepped forward and barked, Nolan, why don't you go tidy up the bedding aisle? He blinked. It's already clean, then double check it. And don't just stand there doing nothing. She snapped. Mika flinched. A customer 3 feet away looked up from a stack of table runners. Nolan stayed put. Carolyn, he's still in the building. You sure this is how you want to act right now? She froze. Her lips parted for a moment, then shut. She turned back toward the register and started reorganizing gift cards, even though they were already perfectly aligned. Mika took a shallow breath and stepped out from behind the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked toward the back. She found Dorian standing in the small lighting section, looking over a shelf of desk lamps. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. "Mr. Maxwell," she said softly. He glanced sideways. "Call me Dorian." "Okay." She hesitated. "I just wanted to say, I recognized you right away." "I just didn't know what to do," he nodded. "You did the right thing. I didn't really do anything," she murmured. "I should have spoken up sooner. I was scared. You were aware. That's the first step most people skip." He turned fully to face her. "You didn't make excuses. That matters." Mika let the words sit. "She's rough sometimes. Carolyn, I don't think she realizes how she sounds." "She knows," he said calmly. "She's just gotten used to no one correcting her." Mika looked down. "Some people here, they've quit without even saying goodbye. I used to think maybe they just found better jobs. Now I'm not so sure." Dorian's expression didn't change, but his silence was heavy. He looked past her for a moment, then said, "Tell me something. If you were in charge here, what would you do different?" She blinked. "Me? Yes, you work here. You know what it's like. What would you fix?" Mika glanced around. "I'd stop treating everyone like a number. Carolyn talks down to people, pretends she's joking, but she means it. And she always makes us feel small, like we're lucky just to be here. And you think people do better work when they feel like they don't matter?" "No," Mika said quickly. "I think people work harder when they feel seen." Dorian smiled. Not a big grin, just enough to show he heard her. They were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Carolyn again. She rounded the corner fast, clipboard in hand. "There you are," she said, feigning cheerfulness. "Just checking in. How's everything looking back here?" "Fine," Dorian said plainly. Carolyn looked at Mika. "Thank you, Mika." "I'll take it from here." Mika hesitated. Dorian raised his hand gently. "She's fine." Carolyn didn't like that, but she kept her tone sweet. "Of course, just trying to be helpful." He stepped toward her. "Carolyn, I need you to do something. Of course. Go wait in the break room." She blinked. "Excuse me. You've made enough decisions for today. Let's pause before you make any more." She opened her mouth to argue, then noticed Mika and Nolan both watching. A customer near aisle 5 turned their head. Without another word, Carolyn walked away. But not because she agreed. Because she had no idea what else to do. Carolyn Ridge sat alone in the break room. The plastic clock on the wall ticked loud enough to make her ears itch. She kept tapping the tip of her pen on the clipboard, trying to look busy, trying to focus on anything other than what she'd just been told. Go wait in the break room. From a man she'd just tried to escort out of the store. She replayed the scene over and over, her own voice in her head sounding worse every time. The way she spoke to him, the tone, the assumptions. And now that tone, that same one she used on him, was the one everyone would remember. In her mind it didn't make sense. She'd been working retail for over 20 years, had managed this location for 6. Sales were steady, shrink was low, and she showed up 6 days a week. Didn't that count for something? But none of that could change what had already happened. Back on the floor, Dorian wasn't pacing or raising his voice. He was doing exactly what he'd come here for, watching, observing. He'd walk the aisles, notepad in hand now, asking the team questions. How scheduling worked, what the training process was like, whether people felt safe saying what was on their minds. Nolan was honest with him. "I've seen Carolyn make people cry. Never in front of customers, but when the door shuts behind that break room, she flips. I've been here long enough to know what to ignore and what to stay out of." Dorian nodded slowly. "Has anyone ever reported her?" "Some did. Nothing came of it." He paused. "So they left?" "Yep." Meanwhile, Mika lingered nearby, helping a customer pick out drawer organizers. But her eyes stayed on Dorian. Not in fear, but in respect. She'd heard of leaders like him. Seen interviews. Watched stories on the news about people who work their way up from nothing, but still remembered where they came from. He reminded her of her uncle. Quiet. Smart. Didn't speak unless it mattered. Soon, the front doors opened, and a tall woman in a blue blazer walked in briskly, pulling a black leather tote. She looked around, spotted Dorian, and headed straight to him. Lena Mayfield, Regional Director. "Dorian," she said, shaking his hand. "You all right?" "Yeah." He said. "Thanks for coming on short notice. I was already halfway here for the Smyrna location." She lowered her voice. "Want to handle this privately, or?" "Break room," Dorian said simply. Lena nodded. the two made their way to the back. When Carolyn saw Lena walk in, her eyes darted between them. Nervous now, she stood up fast. "Miss Mayfield," she said quickly. "I had no idea he was the owner, did I? I would have handled everything differently if I'd known." Lena raised a hand. "Carolyn, we are not here for excuses. Sit." Carolyn dropped back into the chair. Dorian remained standing, arms relaxed at his sides. Lena placed her tote down and pulled out a slim folder. "We've had several complaints about this location, ranging from poor communication to discriminatory behavior. I've reviewed some of them myself. Until today, we didn't have clear evidence tying them directly to you." Carolyn opened her mouth, then closed it. Lena continued, flipping a page. "This morning changed that. You turned away your boss. You made snap judgments based on how he looked. And you did it loudly, in front of staff and customers, that I thought he was." Carolyn began. "That's the problem," Dorian said. "You thought, you didn't ask." He stepped closer, voice still even. "This isn't about me being the owner. This is about how you treat people when you think they're beneath you." Carolyn looked like she wanted to crawl out of her own skin. Lena slid a paper across the table. "Your resignation. You can sign it and leave quietly today, or we move forward with termination." Carolyn stared at the form. "After everything I've done for this store." Dorian leaned down. "Sometimes, what you do isn't nearly as loud as how you do it." Carolyn stared at him, face flushed. Then, without a word, she picked up the pen and signed. Lena stood. "We'll walk you out in 5." Dorian stayed back as Carolyn left, escorted by a store assistant. No parade. No scene, just the soft thud of her shoes on tile. But her absence rang louder than any apology she could have given. The break room door shut behind Carolyn with a soft click. No one said a word for a full 5 seconds. The air still held the echo of everything that had just happened. The accusations, the silence, the resignation that came too late. Lena exhaled and turned to Dorian. "You handled that well," she said, pulling her tote onto her shoulder. "No shouting. No threats, just truth. That's all I came for." Dorian replied. "TOC the truth for myself." "You saw it," Lena said, nodding once. "And so did they." She left with a quick goodbye to the staff on the floor. Dorian didn't follow right away. He stayed in the break room just for a moment longer. The chairs were cheap plastic. The bulletin board cluttered with months-old flyers. The coffee machine wheezed in the corner like it was ready to quit too. He looked around and realized. This was where Carolyn had probably humiliated people for years. Quietly off the sales floor, behind closed doors where no one would defend them. But not anymore. He walked out. At the front, Mika stood behind the register, organizing receipts. Nolan was adjusting a shelf display of candles without much focus. Another part-timer, Angela Tucci, wiped the same countertop twice, just to avoid looking up. Dorian clapped his hands gently to get their attention. 3 pairs of eyes met his. "I want to talk to all of you," he said. They gathered near the register. A small circle, uneven, unsure. "I know today was awkward," he said, "but this needed to happen." Mika nodded slowly. Nolan crossed his arms. "Let me be clear," Dorian continued. "Carolyn didn't lose her job because she had a bad day, or because she said one wrong thing. She lost it because that attitude wasn't new and it wasn't acceptable. Not in this store. Not in any store with my name on the paperwork." Nolan spoke up. "We've seen her run off 3 new hires in the last 2 months. One left in tears, never even picked up her last check." Angela added. "She used to make fun of people's accents, said it was just teasing." But no one laughed. Mika didn't speak, she just stared at the floor. Dorian turned to her. "Mika, you were the only one today who spoke with your eyes before your mouth. That told me everything." She looked up slowly. "I didn't know if it was my place," she whispered. He nodded. "Let me make it your place," she blinked. "What do you mean?" "Effective immediately." He said, "Your lead cashier. I'm putting your name on the list for assistant manager training. That doesn't mean favoritism. IT means I saw someone who observes before speaking. That's leadership." Mika's eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. "Thank you," she said, quiet and stunned. "You earned it." Dorian said simply. Angela gave her a gentle smile. Nolan gave her a little nod of approval. Dorian clapped his hands once. "Now, the rest of you. No one's getting fired. But we're doing things differently starting today. There's going to be a suggestion box. Anonymous. You'll all get a survey from HR.no names attached. Say what you need to say. I can't fix what I don't know. Nolan raised his hand. Can we talk about overtime rules? Put it in writing. We'll start there. Dorian looked at all of them again. I'm not a savior. I'm not perfect. But I'm not here to let silence be the policy. They stood there. Not clapping, not cheering. Just standing in a quiet agreement none of them had expected to feel that day. Mika finally asked, Are you going to visit the other stores like this too? I already have. Dorian replied. And I will again. No warning. No clipboard. Just walking in, Mika smiled. Small but real. Angela stepped forward. You staying the rest of the day? Not as your boss. Dorian said. But I'll help stock the throw pillows if you're short. A little laughter broke the tension, and for the first time all day the store felt lighter. But Dorian wasn't done. He still had something important to say, and it needed to come from the heart. An hour later the mood inside Wendell and Birch had shifted like someone opened a window that had been sealed shut for years. The staff still moved carefully. But it wasn't out of fear. IT was like they were finally breathing real air. Dorian stayed. He didn't hide in an office or pace the aisles acting important. He picked up a box cutter, broke down packaging in the back, and helped Nolan rearrange a seasonal display of glassware that Carolyn had always insisted stayed. Just so. Nolan chuckled as he watched Dorian restack the tumblers. You know, you're not bad at this. I've done worse for less, Dorian said, sliding a box to the side. When I was 19, I stocked forklifts at a warehouse in Decatur. Back then, no AC, no music. Just sweat and concrete. Bet no one tried to kick you out of there, Nolan muttered. Dorian raised an eyebrow. You'd be surprised. I was wearing a uniform and still had people asking if I was lost. They both shared a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Near the counter, Mika helped an elderly woman check out. Her voice was steady, professional. But she wasn't glancing over her shoulder anymore. She wasn't shrinking behind a register like she had been that morning. Angela returned from lunch with 2 sweet teas and handed one to Dorian without saying a word. He took it with a nod. That was all the thanks she needed. By mid-afternoon, the store felt like it belonged to them again. Dorian gathered everyone near the front once business slowed. A few regulars browsed in the background, but the floor was quiet enough for a proper talk. He looked at the faces in front of him. Young, older, black. White, tired, uncertain. Hopeful. Did I want to say something before I go? He said. And I want it to be clear. Mika leaned on the counter. Nolan crossed his arms again, but this time without tension. When I bought this chain, I didn't want to change everything. I wanted to keep what worked and fix what didn't. I believe in second chances. I believe people make mistakes, but I don't believe in pretending something is okay just because it's been happening a long time. He let the words settle before continuing. Respect is not a courtesy. It's a condition. It's the price of working here. If someone can't give it, they don't belong here. Doesn't matter if they've been here 6 weeks or 6 years. Angela spoke softly. A lot of us have just stayed quiet. I know. Dorian replied. And I understand why, but silence lets the wrong people grow roots. And eventually they choke the good out. He turned to Mika. You said something earlier. That people work harder when they feel seen. She looked surprised. He remembered. Yeah? You were right. People don't need bonuses to stay loyal. They need respect. They need to know their voice matters. Angela nodded. Nolan rubbed the back of his neck, visibly taking it in. Dorian continued. Starting next month, every employee gets a private one-on-one with HR, off the clock. No managers present, just your voice. What's working? What's not? It's overdue. Mika smiled faintly. That sounds fair. No, Dorian said. That sounds right. The automatic doors opened behind them as a family walked in, chatting over what color curtains they needed. Business resumed. Normal returned. But it wasn't the same normal as before. Dorian took a step back, grabbing his truck keys from his back pocket. I'll be back, he said. Not with a suit, not with a speech. Just to see. Can I ask you something? Nolan said, sure. You ever get tired of fixing places that should have been doing better on their own? Dorian paused. Every day. So why keep doing it? Because I remember what it felt like when no one did. But what stuck with them most wasn't the answer. It was the way he said it, like it was never even a question to begin with. Word got around fast. Not because of an email blast or some corporate press release, but because people talked, not just inside the Roswell store, but across the other 6 locations Dorian owned. A former co-worker texted a friend. That friend told their cousin who worked at the Lithonia branch. By the end of the week, even the janitor at the Macon location had heard the story. Did you hear what happened to the manager in Roswell? CEO walked in dressed like a customer. She tried to kick him out, fired before her next break. No yelling. No threats, just handled. But what kept getting repeated? What people whispered in the break rooms, mentioned in car rides home, and shared over lunch breaks? Was that line. That sentence Dorian had dropped on his way out, like it cost him nothing. Respect has to be practiced every day. If you can't show it, you can't work here. It stuck, not because it was flashy, not because it came with fireworks, but because it was something they all knew to be true, and no one had ever said it that plainly before. For Mika, that moment was more than just a new title. It was the first time she felt her voice had weight, not just because she spoke up, but because someone listened. The lead cashier badge they gave her wasn't just a plastic rectangle. IT meant something now. It meant she'd earned the right to help shape how people were treated. Nolan. He stayed on. He trained 2 new hires that month, made sure they knew how to lift heavy boxes and how to carry their worth without letting anyone strip it down. Angela went back to part-time shifts, but she said she finally felt like she wasn't just punching in. She was part of a team, not a silent workforce. And Dorian? He didn't mention the Roswell visit on his social media. No inspirational posts. No humble brags. He just kept doing what he'd been doing for years. Walking into his stores quietly, talking to staff directly, correcting what needed to be corrected without grandstanding. He knew better than anyone that leadership isn't about how loud you talk. It's about what people say about you when you're not in the room. Weeks later, when he stopped by the Smyrna store wearing the same jeans and t-shirt, someone opened the door for him before he even touched it. Mr. Maxwell, the young employee said, holding it open. Welcome back. Dorian smiled. You know who I am? The kid grinned. We all do now. Because it wasn't just a story anymore. IT was a standard. Something that changed the tone in every room it touched. Managers started checking themselves before snapping. Employees stood taller. The culture didn't flip overnight, but it shifted just enough to matter.